Hello, and thank you to the over 550 of you who've registered for Cal-APABA's APAs versus Hate Conference. My name is Brian Byun, one of the directors of Cal-APABA, and I have the privilege of introducing our esteemed moderator and panelists today. But before I do that, I wanted to recognize our very generous sponsors, Davis Wright Tremaine, Hanson Bridget LLP, Procopio, Squire Patton Boggs, Wilson Farr and Gallagher, the Dolan Law Firm, Katharina Perez, and donors Oric, the Northern California chapter of the Iranian American Bar Association, and our other individual donors. I also want to thank our 28 community co-sponsors for their support and allyship. The purpose of this conference is to inform, but also to inspire action. If you are willing to serve as a legal referral for victims of hate incidents or hate crimes, please email us at calapaba@gmail.com. All donations that we collect will go directly to Stop AAPI Hate and API Legal Outreach. Today, we'll be continuing a conversation we began a couple of weeks ago, confronting the difficult racial issues related to anti-Asian hate and talking specifically about how to situate AAPIs in the current discussions happening in boardrooms everywhere about the importance of diversity and inclusion. Returning to help us navigate and moderate today will be Angela Oh. Angela is an attorney, mediator, and a founding member of NAPABA and the Multicultural Bar Alliance. In 1998, Angela was appointed to serve on President Bill Clinton's 7-member advisory board to his initiative on race. We are pleased to have as our panelists today, Chris Kwok, a board member for the Asian American Bar Association of New York, who also works as a neutral at JAMS, where he specializes in labor and employment disputes. Duck Ta, a professional chef and the host of Cooking with Duck. A former prison lifer, he has since worked in the community, including with the Amity Foundation, to assist newly released 3 strikers in finding jobs and housing, and helping to co-found the nonprofit API Rise, which seeks to empower API communities and individuals who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. Marvin Wadlow Jr. is an actor, writer, and coach, and he's also the co-founder and co-host of the podcast Table Setters, which offers honest and tough conversations on race and racism in America. And finally, Ebony Abram, a community advocate. She works now at LA Voice, a multiracial, multi-faith community organization that trains people to speak, act, and work together to transform Los Angeles County into one that reflects the dignity of all people. She's also a member of API Rise, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, Live Free's Street Certified Team, and Black and API Solidarity Group. We welcome audience questions, so please feel free to enter them in the chat box. And with that, I'll cede the floor to Angela.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again for this conversation. Today, we decided we wanted to focus on questions that have been coming through to Cal-APABA and through communities across the country that have to do with where are APIs situated in this whole race conversation that's happening now. It's evolving now. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to make a couple of comments before we jump into a deeper conversation on this subject. So let me start with you, Chris, and then after you, I'm going to jump over to Marvin.
So within the D&I universe, the training, those kind of things, I think Asian Americans have always felt like they're the little brothers or little sisters. And that was the role that I think I was happy to play. I understood sort of my role in it, why that was. We never charged corporations for doing an AAPI Heritage Month or doing talks. And we were just there, sort of getting our story out. We were happy to do that. But I think that the ground is changing beneath our feet, like right now, in a way that is real progress, and I'm feeling it. I've experienced it in the last week, which I'll be happy to get more into later on. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Marvin, how about you from your lived experience?
Ooh, wow. Well, my lived experience involves me as a student athlete, a professional athlete, a father, now of adult children who are Black API, Samoan, and having conversations with them, which I had specifically on this subject yesterday, which I'll get into later. This will be from their perspective and their voices.
Okay, thank you. And Ebony, how about you? And I'll follow up with Duck.
For me, from my lived experience, growing up in Los Angeles and also being the descendant of Black people who were enslaved, as well as immigrants from Okinawa, Japan. My grandmother was actually born in what most call internment camps, but I call them concentration camps here in this country. I have experienced being in solidarity with people from Asian communities as well as the African American community with the current movement that's happening presently and even for the past year. And then also have done a lot of research about the years of solidarity that have taken place throughout every civil rights movement between Asian and African Americans. And
Thank you.
As well. Thank you.
Duck, how about you?
Thank you. Yeah, for me, I was born and raised in Westlake, Los Angeles. And, I grew up in a predominantly Mexican American neighborhood. So there weren't a lot of Asian people growing up. And so I didn't really get to see, how growing up around a feeling included, if anything, I felt excluded from my community and from my peers. And it wasn't until I became older and we moved out to a predominantly Asian neighborhood that I realized, wow, there's a larger community of Asian community members around us. And, then I started to see the big differences of, equity in regards to the API community and where I originally came from, where I was born and raised. And just to see the difference of how that's compounded and continued through society today with the work that I do in the community. We are still marginalized in regards to the social advocacy work. Like Chris has said, we feel like the little brothers and sisters in the community work, but like him, we are feeling a shift underneath our feet right now within the community. More and more different organizations and communities are now reaching out and actively trying to get us more involved with them. So something's shifting for sure.
All right, I like this theme of shift. So Chris, since you brought this up originally, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing. And I know that a lot of the audience out there is interested in both what's happening in the private sector, but also in the public sector and the civil society space and in grassroots organizing. So whatever you can speak to, why don't you talk about what you see?
I'm sorry, Angela. I'll tell you straight what's been happening the last 2 to 3 weeks, and really just the last 2 to 3 weeks. I'm a lawyer. I'm a mediator, but all of a sudden, the last 3 weeks, I've gotten invitations, paid invitations, to be like a diversity inclusion consultant to talk about anti-Asian violence, to give a presentation on it. We're giving we're doing it for free because it's so important. But there are all these offers coming in. They're like, can you come in and we'll pay you? And I'm like, I'm not used to getting paid to talk about this. This is incredible. I'm actually not used to having the mainstream care about the issues that are about me. And so I'm kind of like feeling for the first time about talking about it in the mainstream. A children's publisher reached out to me to say, we think you might be good to review this thing we're doing for high schoolers, learning tools, things about Asian Americans. And I'm like, wow, everything's happening all at once. And this is good stuff. This is stuff we've been fighting for forever because of Asian American studies. We always had Asian American studies next to American studies. But of course, we know, like African American studies, it's American history. And it's making its way into the mainstream in a way that is the long-term goals of everyone that's been doing this work. So it's amazing.
Yeah, so unfortunately, part of the dynamic is probably the anti-Asian hate incidents that are happening on the street. I'd like to ask Ebony to comment on that, because you've been doing a lot of solidarity work between Black and API community. So how are you reading? I mean, yes, we're being uplifted in people's consciousness who may not have noticed or cared about this community before, but it's coming on the heels of a lot of very hateful stuff that is being expressed physically, verbally, psychologically.
Thank you, Angela. What I'm seeing is, on one hand, people working together and really uniting towards ending oppression and some of the ills of living and being in a capitalistic society. On another hand, I am seeing and hearing even immediate blood family members upset, asking, why should we stand to stop Asian hate when where are Asian people, Asian API folks, during some of our movements? And it's for myself personally, has been an opportunity to make it a teachable moment and really give real lived examples of what has happened throughout history and presently, because people really just don't know. And so we, without awareness, have limited perspectives sometimes. And it's really just about healing, and healing for everyone is possible. So,
yeah. Marvin, where are you coming in on this, having talked to another generation of folks, your sons in particular, who carry both?
I mean, it's a little bit of a cross into everybody's territory, right? I have one son, 22, who is probably, he calls it like, yeah, people always ask me if I'm Asian, usually it's white people. Because I spoke to him about, are you hearing anything in your age demographic about like, yeah, let's just go find Asian person and beat them up? And he's like, no, Dad, that's not my circle anyway. But it's not direct racism, but sometimes people catch themselves around me. And he hears that. He was just followed, I guess, like 10 minutes before I called by some white guy on a campus. He's a coach. He's a volleyball coach, because he was an All-American volleyball player at community college. So, some white guy was following him forever, and he finally walked up to him and asked him what's going on. So he gets a lot of that. But he also felt like, look, there may be some feelings amongst Black people that, yeah, where are Asians when for the last 250 years? Sure, we can point out a few. This is from him directly, not from me. Now, maybe him growing up under me had those conversations. Look, I run a nonprofit to have people sit down and have these conversations, but let's be real, they haven't happened. The great confessions haven't happened, but people want to quick to jump to reconciliation. And I say, no, there's confession before reconciliation. And so that hasn't happened. My other son, Marvin, who's in a community, I call him Surfs Up Valley Boy. In the Valley, it's just a bunch of kids running around. It's not South Central, but he has an Asian friend that has a TikTok, and he's talking about these things. And he's like, finally, Asians can talk about these things. And that kind of set me up to say, yeah, finally, we're here. It's time. But Voters' Right Act, Brown versus Board of Education, all precedent cases that all minorities fall under, we were the forefront of that. And I probably think there's some anger about that. And there's some conversations to have. And so my youngest son said, look, Dad, things can escalate real quick in the Black community. So especially if you're in a group and something goes down, it just escalates. You're a follower. I'm not, but I've seen that before. And that's some of the reasons he thinks these are happening. They're random, but he also said, like, how many incidents have there been with Black people? And who just did the last shooting in Atlanta? Asians. And he goes, Trump too is just stirring up people of all nationalities. So those are my son's perspectives, which are pretty much my perspective on things. As I have to look at my level of discomfort or anger, let's just be honest, as I drive on campuses and I see who the majorities are, and then I drive in my neighborhoods where it looks like me, and there are men, all different types of ages, who are on the corner.
Yeah.
They're not on a campus. And this has been for 265 years.
All right. That's a
So
perspective.
there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger. But what do? You have to talk about it.
Well,
But
this is
we
one
won't
space.
do that.
We'll be I think seeing more of these kinds of spaces open up.
I
And
just
there's
gotta be
a-
honest though. We said that. I've heard that for 265 years. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we have to see. We have to see.
But
Doug,
it
how
hasn't
about
happened.
okay. Doug, I think oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Marvin about, that we need to have this conversation, and just coming from the community perspective of doing social advocacy work, and I'm just going to speak in regards to how I see fit and like what I think about this is, when you get two fractions of two ethnic groups, let's say the Asian in opening up a liquor store or business in a dominant African-American neighborhood, right? And this was shared to us in another meeting that I thought was such a great teaching tool to use. Both sides, right? Always question, why does the other ethnic group hate me? Why is there this weird underlying tension that no one really ever talks about? But yet, when a young African-American woman or man walks into this store, they get these, looks, or they get these, follows, and it causes this underlying tension that's really unnecessary, right? But then we just look at it in one perspective and just see for what it is, and we run off with that. Oh, well, they don't like me because I'm Black, or they don't like, we don't like them because they're Asian, and that's easy to go there, right? But you got to understand that both ethnic groups have suffered deep trauma, generational trauma, right? And then there's the cultural aspect you have to take into that in regards to, and I'm going to speak for the API aspect from my own life experience. As Asian parents of immigrants who come here, they've been advised, don't open your mouth because it'll bring trouble to the household and the family. Everything you do, focus it internally. Don't put your business out in public, right? And so therefore they become very submissive and quiet. They mind their own business. They go about their business. They start their businesses and they go about their day. And so, there's a lot of cultural aspects there. There's a lot of trauma. Maybe things have happened within the community where their business have been held. And so therefore they, rather than have it, because they've never been given the tool like restorative justice to bring both parties to the table and say, hey, maybe something happened to you guys back in the day, but that has nothing to do with an entire race. And we have to break that way of thinking, and we have to learn a new way of thinking in order to move forward and for any true healing to really begin, because if not, it's just all surface.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, I want to really focus, because the conversation today was supposed to be about where are Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders situated in the whole race discourse that's going on right now. And I would suggest to you that where we're situated is in this moment is victims who maybe even deserve to be victimized. That's on the street. In the private sector, there's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion, and a lot of talk about adopting the values that would embrace people. But when you look at the opportunities, they're just not there for people of color, let alone Asians. In some respects, my experience has been that Asians are viewed as what we might call white adjacent. So when the opportunity exists for diversity and inclusion kind of work, the equity piece kind of gets lost, because just like the concept of Asian American, which no human beings actually really relate to in our communities, they relate by their home countries. but it's a political and social construct that is convenient and is powerful, as you see, even the title of this program, right? And yet, what happens is that there's so much diversity within our population that even if there is a slot for an Asian, it's going to be a fight between the Japanese candidate and the Filipino candidate, or the Chinese candidate and the Korean candidate, because there's only room for one, right? So this is the conversation. I kind of am curious whether you've encountered this. So I guess I'm going to rotate back to you, Chris. Have you encountered this, and how you dealt with it? And what's the message you're putting out when you get these paid gigs?
Yeah. So I'll start, like, I'm Chinese American, although many people, like, when they encounter me, they think I'm Korean. So when I was growing up in the 90s in New York, the Korean deli owners were very kind to me when I walked in. They would speak to me in Korean, and then I would tell them the awful truth. I would say, I'm Chinese. And then everything would change. They would stop smiling. And I kind of got really angry after a while. Like, it was just like, because it was like I started with warmth, and all of a sudden they're like, it's like they almost believe I was lying about being, Chinese. And I was like, what's going on? I'm proud to be Chinese. I'm just telling you. So I think that's just to illustrate that I kind of came out of high school like, yeah, I'm with the Koreans because a lot of my friends were Korean Americans my age. But then my experience within the deli was also like, I didn't like going into a lot of them because they were kind of mean to me. So I don't know if there's anyone who talks about that, but that was my real lived experience. Asians and Blacks should not fight for the crumbs off the table, and they need to understand, as I've heard, that if we increase the justice for everybody, that it's going to be better for everyone. That's the message. Like, I'm a labor and employment lawyer, so what in my head when I look at Asians and how they're treated by institutions, it's how they view Asians, particularly Asian women, workhorse, not the show horse. It's like they're going to come in, they're just going to work like crazy. I can abuse them. I can probably sexually harass them, and then they won't get promoted, and then they aren't. Like, there's others that are show horses. They come in, they just shoot right up to the top. You're like, what? 30 year in, and they're already VP? And as an employment lawyer of over 2 decades, I've seen that over and over. So I feel empowered by the last few months, built on the sacrifices of the people that have been, that have died, as well as suffered sort of harassment and violence. But I think we have a duty now to go in there and tell the truth. Because within corporate diversity and inclusion, it's corporate diversity and inclusion. It's a very cleaned up sort of like version of it. And I've sat in some of those things and just wanted to like throw up and like yank people off the stage because it's been so cleaned up for the corporate environment. And we need to be brave when we are paid to go in there. And I haven't done this yet, so I'm kind of like, to be like, this is what I've seen and experienced, and this is how we can be better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So any of you want to comment on this idea of where we're situated in your environment? I'll tell you, in the criminal courts building in the day when I was in practice, it was very interesting to me and notable. It was a double-edged sword. It was always, in my cases, multiple defendants. So we were a gang, whether we were or not. The second thing was, and it was interesting also, I could pitch for diversion and get it for my client who was Asian, right? But the Black and brown kids, I noticed, went right to jail. There was no pitching that seemed very successful. So I saw both sides of this. And, when you're a gang member and they make that allegation, there are enhancements, right? On the other side, if I had a single defendant that I represented, if I pitched for diversion and there was no prior history, I usually got it. I didn't see the same thing happening with Black and brown defendants. So interesting, right? That phenomenon. And that translates. I don't know how it translated in your lived experience, Doug.
Thank you. I don't know if this is relevant, but just listening to what Chris was saying and, talking about inclusion, I think our society still has this very incorrect misconception when discussing issues about the API community. And it falls on the same premise of going into prison and being labeled as an other on a yellow piece of paper, right? The color represents the color of my skin, which is a yellow piece of card, right? And then we're called other because there's too many different ethnic groups underneath the API spectrum to label: Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Thai, and so let's just call them other. So, and then you come out here and it's the same thing within the business world, the education world, the community world. We have so many different fractions, but yet when it comes to certain things that we come up against, rather than addressing what the Korean community needs or the Cambodian community needs, the Chinese community, the whatever other API ethnic there is, we just cast everybody under one umbrella and assume that, all APIs have the same problems, the same issues. And like, I think we also have to learn that new way of thinking. And if we don't, we continue to oppress our people under this umbrella of, all APIs suffer from the same issues, when you have to dissect it even further than that,
Right.
It's just as bad as me saying, well, Mexicans are like Cubans and Puerto Ricans and Spaniards, and that is completely ignorant, right? Because that is not the case, and that is the same thing within the API community. So when we're talking about inclusion and equity, we really got to take a look at that and really understand that, hey, API is not just a yellow card, but there's so many other different ethnics that fall under that API category, and that we really need to look at each API ethnic group and their needs, of how we can truly include them in this society without just picking a Chinese guy because it fits the API slot, and then disregard every other API ethnic race that is probably just as equally fit to be in that position. So
Right. And this points out to the phenomenon of complexity. We're living in an age of real complexity. There are no, especially when it comes to employment opportunities, promotional opportunities, leadership opportunities. There is, if you're in a particular kind of framework, as far as an organization, then there's going to be limited opportunities for promoting up. And the competition gets more and more fierce. In the community, it's a different kind of dynamic, right? But there's still sort of a race place for AAPIs. Ebony, I know you've had some tough conversations that have put you in tears, even with some of your friends, family, and how have you navigated yourself through those moments where you've tried to hold space for both? Because you're a whole person, right? You're not Japanese one side and African American on another day. I mean, your whole self is much more complex, right?
Absolutely. So the way that I'm able to navigate those conversations and experiences are to really try to listen and hear people's hearts, but also be very true to my own heart, and just help direct those conversations to the root cause of why we see things the way we see them, why we experience things the way that we see them. Kind of to Duck's point about, because I did grow up in South Central Los Angeles, when he mentioned some of the tension that happens with businesses that are in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. One of my cousins mentioned, something about feeling like a criminal just for walking into stores growing up, especially during the 90s. Then fast forward to seeing the Asian American History special that was on PBS, which I know was, very, there wasn't enough time, even though it was a mini series, to learn as much as we can, but hearing the woman who spoke before immigrating from India, I believe, being told to, stay far away from Black people as possible, or you'll be treated like them. So the root of it for me is white supremacy in this country and anti-Blackness, which has different levels that affects every minority group or ethnic group. Mm-hmm. And so if we can have those hard conversations then we can learn and grow together. Because I had a very intense conversation with my own cousin last Saturday, to the point, not shouting and cursing, but, it was very heated. And me just wanting her to hear my heart the same way that I'm hearing her heart, because I have her same experience as well, because I am a whole person and people don't see my DNA by looking at me. They see me as a Black woman. And even to Doug's point too, growing up checking boxes for enrollment for anything, there aren't a lot of options. And so, and they're labels that we, the people, didn't create for ourselves. So
Yeah.
it's tough. And I get tearful because I'm an emotional being, and I'm unapologetically so. And the next day, my cousin actually thanked me for taking the time to go back and forth with her, and that she really will take my advice and read some of the material that I shared with her, or watch some of the documentaries that I shared with her, because she wants to learn. But I also understand her pain, because it's very real and it's very lived, and it's in me also. So.
Right. And that brings me to you, Marvin, because I have a question about what you think the role of media is in creating the kinds of impressions that we have about each other if we don't actually have relationships with one another. So, love for you to riff on that a little bit, just based on your experience with the industry, as well as your efforts to try and bridge some of these divides.
Man, it's funny. I look at media and sports are they can be common ground builders. Speaking as a former professional athlete, because when you have a common goal and you're on the same team, you have a lot of these conversations, but you're also heading in one direction. And the example I use is Naomi Osaka, who's Japanese and Haitian. And so she's probably number 2 in the world in tennis right now. But when she first came on the scene 4 years ago, very quiet, because that's part of her Japanese culture. As Duck said, your head down, move straight ahead. But when you're on an international level, the way she was immediately, she got thrown into the lion's den with media. And it was rough for her, because she didn't know which side of her culture to pull from. Jump 3 years, 4 years later, and she is not only leading Black Lives Matter, but she is saying, hey, I am fully person Haitian. I speak that language and I speak Japanese. And so I don't know, what am I? And she was turning the table. And now she says she is so glad she found her voice. And I think that speaks to her Japanese side. I think she's also saying, I'm so glad I can manage my Black side, my Haitian side, because you don't know what to do. And so I think sports becomes a common denominator, but not everybody can be a professional. In terms of the media, I beg Asian, African-American, male, female, Latinos, Latinas, tell your story. Because the fact of the matter is, unless you tell it, somebody white's gonna tell it. I promise you. Slumdog Millionaire compared to White Tiger, not even close. White Tiger's so amazing because it's his own story, as opposed to a British guy telling your story. Great movie, but it's not your story. And so you see, I think, once again, a lot of African Americans have led the way in over 100+ years in this business. And finally, it's 4 or 5 films a year. And I'm not a Black filmmaker. I'm a filmmaker who's Black. So you have to tell your story. Farewell. Last year, just sweeping the Oscars for the Korean director with Parasite, because it's just a great movie. No matter who you are, yes, it's making fun of Western culture. Yes, it's making fun of our capitalistic society. Yes, it's making fun of hierarchy and caste systems. But that's what's happening. So you have to write and talk about what's happening. And there just can't be enough Asians, African Americans, Latinos that tell their story. There can't be enough because you got a lot of movies to catch up with. But I find that Asian experience of movies is like fast tracked right now, and that's a good thing. It's really a good thing. Yes, we have Crazy Rich Asians, and there will probably be another one. But Farewell, Parasite, this year, the film that's out this year, an Asian American up for an Oscar, Best Actor. That's huge leaps, and it's great. I applaud it all, but we got to get going to have these conversations. We have to get going, and because what I heard early, like 3 or 4 years ago, from Asians in my Lyft ride, that I find out are filmmakers. They're like, "Oh, well, I'm going to be a sound person." I'm like, "A sound person? That's a job." No, you want to be a creator. You have to create your story. You have to promote your own story. So.
Right. Thank you.
That's my perspective.
And what about media in terms of news, Chris? I noticed you were quoted in a New York Times article this past week about another incident that occurred. Now, how do you view media and how it shapes the thinking process of decision makers, right?
Right.
Who are in the role of deciding who will have an opportunity and who will not have an opportunity, whether it's in politics, private sector, any sector. They're reading the news. So how do you see that?
You have to know the narrative that you believe is the right one. You have to be able to explain it to them in a way. You have to sense the contours of where they don't know. Newspaper writers are not subject matter experts on everything. They know that. And so they come to people depending on the story, and they want you to guide them, and then they'll sort of trust you or not. And you kind of have to. So for the first week when people were talking to me, it was a real revelation for me, because I was like, I'm sensing what they don't know. I didn't know that. now I have to reformat to tell them what they want to know in a way that I didn't realize I had to explain. And so I'm constantly feeling, and this is from our mediation background, I think, Angela, like, what do you know? Because it's actually most important what they don't know. And so you're like, oh, I think that's what you don't know. Let me tell you, let me try to fill that in with what I think is the answer. And so for Asian Americans and this experience, this constructed identity, we have to, have that construction, but then also understands the complexity behind it, right? So it's a real, and everything's shifting. It's like everything is on the fly right now. Everything's happening. So it's really actually exciting and exhausting, but there is promise, and we have to take that opportunity, as Marvin said, to tell the story and to be honest, because when I could tell the story about my failures, I was free to be more honest. And then what happened was people connected with that honesty. They felt, oh, he's talking about when he failed. Who talks about when they failed? So I'm like, oh, that freed me. That freed me a little bit. And so I felt free. 15 years ago, I started talking in panels in front of law schools, and I decided I'm just going to be honest as much as I can, and if I might just talk about sort of where we fit in.
Yeah, sure.
It begins with gratitude. A lot of immigrant parents post 65 are grateful to white people, because the mythology is white people built this country. They let us in. We're going to be grateful to them. Oh, and then there's some troublesome black people that are, making our life difficult when we get here. That is with a very wide brush, kind of I think, if you come here, that's what you hear. Just be grateful we let you in. So I think the counter for me is to read a lot of history. I look at the Civil War in Reconstruction, right? And the 14th Amendment, which gave birthright citizenship to freed African-American slaves. The birthright citizenship of Chinese and Japanese populations thereafter all go back to the 14th Amendment and the Chinese litigation about that. And then the Japanese, sort of redress movement, the way they held land under their kids for the next 100 years, all goes back to that moment, that Reconstruction, that freedom movement that America had. So that's how we think about our place in the history. We're there. We might be oh, I don't know. Am I there? I'm not going to look. Guess what? We're there. We benefited. So let's give credit where credit is due. Let's know where we come from. Let's say, thank you. I get it. It was the black people. It was the white people. We all we benefited when we were in small numbers and had no rights as legal persons, and so that's how I think about where we belong.
Yeah. And in your space, Duck, when you came and were looking for support and you were trying to find a way to establish as you came home back to community, what did you find?
Nothing. Yeah, it's just plain that simple. There was no, there were no resources that at the time in 2013 that focused primarily on reentry, the reentry process for APIs being released from prison. There are a lot of African American organizations, Mexican American organizations, and if you weren't an addict or if you weren't an alcoholic, then there wasn't really much resources for you. So that kind of gave birth to API Rise. We figured, well, if there is nothing here, let's create one. Let's figure it out. I don't know. I'm just a guy that got out of prison. But I see a need in the community, and I know the work that I do, and I know the work that can be done. So, I gathered some heads together, and we formed this organization to help API brothers and sisters coming out of prison, because, there's still a big gap of services geared towards our community members. We don't have it, and like Chris said, I'm so very grateful. Out of the struggle and out of the pain of the past and history and what's happening now, it's giving birth to a lot of opportunities for us to take and to really be heard and to be seen, right? But I say that understanding the weight and the people that I carry on my shoulders as I proceed to move forward with this movement, right? It's just this, I feel like we've been dormant for so long, and now, we just got to start taking that step and making things happen. When we don't see it in existence, we got to create it. We got to take that narrative and we got to write our own story. And, as frightening as that is for me, being formerly incarcerated and being American Chinese, it's a narrative I got to tell. It's a narrative that I got to just put out in the universe, and whatever happens, happens. And hopefully that somebody will grab that, and that seed is planted, and along their journey in life, somebody is going to water that. That's all I can hope for. So.
Thank you. How about you, Ebony? You got any thoughts on this same track here? What did you find when you started getting involved with things like LA Voice?
With getting involved with LA Voice, really modeled for me how multicultural work and interfaith work can really address the needs of all communities collectively. Together, it really models true solidarity, and my work through the work that LA Voice does. We work on issues such as housing and transformative justice and immigration as well. With the transformative justice table, that is how I actually came to LA Voice, as a person who experienced incarceration and was able to really benefit from some of the reentry resources provided. And because it is a space where the theme of it is multicultural, I found representation from all walks of life here.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful, and I know that, there are some out there. It's just when you don't know about them, how do you find them? And, word of mouth is always the best. For sure.
Yeah, that's a great screening mechanism, isn't it? Person-to-person relationships and people who really care.
Absolutely.
I want to open it up. If there are questions out there, we got some nice comments. Reg Holmes, I see you. Appreciating the fact that, you've got voices here today that are articulating a view that you've held, and also Marvin for kind of pointing out it's time for us to have a moment to tell our own stories. I mean, this area of looking at where we're situated in the whole race conversation right now, we need to contextualize in this way as well. And that is that we're coming up on May. I know we're still in April, but you know how we all get a month? Well, May happens to be the month where APIs are held up in all kinds of environments. So there are going to be Heritage Month celebrations or commemorations or special convenings that'll happen at all levels of government, I think, this year in particular, as well as in many spaces, right, that are outside of government. And so it's got a certain kind of energy, this moment for APIs. By June, it'll be gone. It'll be gone. There will be new incidents. There will be a new series of events. We're also situated in a time when the justice system, the criminal justice system, is really being watched closely by all people. It's very reminiscent of the trial of the LAPD officers in the 90s. Here we are watching Minneapolis, and today's testimony was quite moving. We don't want, I don't think, to have these regrets in any of the things that might happen or unfold in front of us. But when we think about how AAPIs might be able to inform and help be, in a way, a container for all of the complexity that we're looking at, what are you thinking about? And Marvin, you can go. I mean, you're a writer and you're in your imagination a lot. So, what are the things that you're thinking about as you are creating?
I mean, the process of creating and the process of writing, or as Chris said, the process of telling your truth and knowing that your narrative is not necessarily right for everybody, but right for you and you believe in it, I think is super important. But the fact of the matter is, I would be remiss if I didn't look at, when we talk about corporations, right, and moving up the ladder, that's not going to happen in a lot of brown and black communities when UC systems still have like 25% white, 23% Asian, or 25% Asian, 23% white, and a growth level of black and brown. Well, brown actually is probably the fastest growing. There was a growth level at UCLA of 1.5%. So the African-American level is now 3%. And this is also affecting the liquor store. This is also affecting black communities and that anger. Yes, it is a roam, conquer, and divide, because we're all stuck together, right? It's a liquor store. It's happening. Boys in the Hood was not just a figment of John Singleton's imagination. It actually was happening before him. It was easy to write. I knew him. It was simple to write. Just somebody needed to write it. And so in terms of the narrative, yes, we have to write our own narrative, but we've got to affect the educational pool, because the skill sets coming out of Black community right now actually is a time where I see a lot of help, like Asian and Black communities talking about money, believe it or not. Like, how do you save money? Where is your money going? That's happening a lot in the Black community, and it's helping us with this anger that's in us, which frankly is somewhat justifiable when you start looking at our educational system and you hear all this diversity talk, and that's not going to happen because you don't have the skill set. It's not going to happen. Yes, for me, it happened, but that's not the story. So fighting to tell it's not the dominant experience, and it's fighting to tell our story, no matter who we are, and joining together to tell our stories. I'm in communication. One of my best friends, Helen Cho, she's Korean. She's writing these amazing stories of her experience. I'm helping her. I'll probably be producing a short for her. We're joining together. It's her experience. She's writing and directing and cinematographer, but it's her experience. But I want to help her do her experience. And I find that a lot of coming to the table there, but I hear talk, corporate world, and it's just talk. Because unless you affect the educational pool, it's not going to happen. It's not.
Right, right. There was an article done by a woman named Sissy Way. It's about diversity and inclusion at work. And, this idea that there's a memo out there, but it's not in writing.
Right.
You have to know somebody in order to get the memo.
Yeah.
And I think the writer, I think her name was Mindy Harris, she wrote a whole book about how to navigate organizations where they have this D&I banner, but they don't really implement, right?
Yeah, that's
So
the
that
Hollywood
memo-
film business. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right. And that's why I'm
Unions.
raising it. The memo needs to be shared more widely. It's out there, but you don't get that memo unless you make the right connection. And so I can just say in this moment, there's an openness for connections to be made, and people need to be aware, self-aware and aware of their environment. People who get the misfortune of an encounter that is assaultive, whether it's verbal or physical, need spaces where they can process what's just happened and heal and get clear about, okay, be ready the next time. There will be a next time for any of us who are in this conversation. We better have a way to reset fairly quickly. We only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to ask everyone to think a bit about what your closing thoughts are on this subject, because we're going to have to turn this back over to Cal-APABA for their next steps of what they'll be doing. But today just to say how complicated this topic is and how sensitive, I don't even feel like we really went very deep into D&I or equity. Somebody else is saying, we always say there's no equity without action. So there are a lot of options in terms of action right now, and hopefully Cal-APABA is going to be offering those up. We also have a list of resources that are prepared that have information about how to get in touch with the AAPI Movement Hub, harassment training, how to deal with youth if you're an educator on these subjects. The Sissy Way article on the memo that isn't actually physically present, and even how civil society organizations are starting to move in a real smart way given the complexity of things. So I just want to give you all a minute or two to just closing thoughts on this subject. Where are Asians situated in connection with, I guess we could call it JEDI, even the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion piece? Duck, you want to go?
Yeah, I think, in regards to community work, and, that's what I know. I think now is a great opportunity that is being presented with the API community within regards to social advocacy, of having that platform to be heard, to start connecting with different organizations, with different ethnic organizations. And I think for us in the community, it is a platform that has been a long time coming. And so for us, in regards to that equity and inclusion, like Chris said, it's exciting and exhausting because it's a lot of work. But, I think for us within the community, this is a awakening for us to really solidify our feet in the foundation of community work and in society.
Thank you. How about you, Ebony? Any last thoughts?
Sure. My last thoughts are for us to be in each other's movements, because at the end of the day, we all want the same for ourselves and our families and those we love. And so if we stand together in each other's movements, it's really standing for yourself. And to just really be careful with the to address the media, be careful and to address what Chris said, believe your narrative and be open to learn and listen for the purpose of hearing.
Yeah.
And just be hopeful. We have to be hopeful no matter what these circumstances appear right now. And so those are
Thank you. Keep
That's
the
real.
hope. Chris, what about you?
Yeah, so the first Reconstruction ended when, political power was given back to the whites, but Asian Americans that came after benefited from it. And then the second Reconstruction was the Civil Rights Movement, and the Asian American identity and the movement came out of it. And those were the gifts that civil rights and Black power gave to Asian American student radicals and activists in the Bay Area in '68 and '69. And there's a great book called The Third Reconstruction, and I think we're in that period now. If you look at Me Too, if you look at BLM, you look at anti-Asian hate and the movement around it, they're all connected.
Yeah,
No place.
Yeah.
Right. We get to reformat, we get to reconstruct America in the way that we want. This is a history-making sort of period. I don't think any of us ever imagined perhaps that we would be like living, walking, being able to participate in these kind of movements. You read it and you're like, man, that's cool. I don't see that anymore. But now, boom, you're there. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah. Marvin.
I think you're right. I want to revisit history a little bit too, in terms of like, look, people, Asian communities, including my own sons, are concerned for their physical being. And they're like 6'6", 200 pounds, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? One, these are practical things my father taught me. Keep your head on a swivel. Don't just randomly walk into. This is just a burden of Black people. Sorry, this is what's happening. And so I believe in like on the ground work. Keep your head on a swivel. Two, Black Panthers really started to put speed bumps in the communities because people were hitting children in their neighborhood. That's how they started. So there's some ground level work you can do here. And it's from the bus strike, right? The Selma bus strike. They gave transportation to people on the ground. They bought them food and went and got it and brought it to their house because they didn't want them on the bus. These are practical things. This is just my idea. Those communities that are forming, walking elderly Asian, I think you should reach out to some African-American groups and have them join with you. If anybody listening is connected, connect with an African-American group and have them join you so their solidarity is seen. Those are on the ground practical things. Yes, one, keep your head on a swivel. That's for your own safety. That's just reality. That's everywhere I go. My father took me to 7-Eleven once. I know I'm long. And I got out and he's like, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to 7-Eleven. He goes, no, you don't. You wait. Does somebody have a bulge in the small of their back? Look at their ankle. Why has he got a coat on in the summer? That's Oakland. That's the Bay Area. That's how I roll. Is there a white guy with a Confederate flag and a flag on one end pulling next to me with his window down? That's just like, since I'm 62, that's day one. And that's the world we're in because this violence is unscripted.
Right. It's unscripted, but there's hope, and we got to keep telling our own story. But we're coming to the end of our time, and I want to thank everybody for their contributions today. And I'm throwing this back to Brian, who I think will be closing us out today.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our panelists and to Angela for sharing their thoughts, perspectives, and viewpoints today on these timely, complex, and challenging topics. Today's conversation and everyone's closing comments have tied in with what I've been thinking about a lot recently, and that's solidarity is the key to diversity, inclusion, and the fight for equity. Wedges that keep us apart, that keep us from trusting, relying on, and supporting each other in our communities, it keeps us all down. And I know it's hard to overcome our internal and personal biases, which may be reinforced by the media, but we all need to keep our eye on the ball, overcoming white supremacy and dismantling systemic racism. We can do this, but we can only do it together. So yes, keep your head on a swivel, but if I've got your back, that's one less angle you need to worry about. We hope you'll all continue having this conversation with your friends, your family members, your work colleagues. Change needs to happen on an institutional level, but it begins at the individual level, one person at a time. So thank you all again for joining us today. By popular request, the APAs versus Hate Conference will continue in April. And next Thursday, April 8th, APA Women, Hate, Gender, and Race. Thank you.